button.
No, you reminded me when you're talking about Punisher. You know what movie series sucks? Rambo.
Oh, yeah?
And I was thinking about how, like, the whole point of that first movie is it's like an exploration of a soldier with PTSD who thinks he's, like, reliving his time in Vietnam. And practically nobody dies that entire film. And then you see, like, the trailer for, like, the new one that just came out, and he's, like, in the trailer just indiscriminately murdering as many non-white people as possible.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, like, the most...
Yeah.
Like, they lost sight of that so fast. Like,
I know, the first one is, like, this, like, really borderline esoteric, like, you know, anti-action movie almost. And it's just, like...
Like, very few series, like, that maybe, like, Jurassic Park, like, by the second movie, you're like, what happened? Like, usually it takes a long time for...
Yeah, it's like
Also-
they're like it's like John Wick, but without any of the motivation.
Yeah.
You're like, what? That's the whole point of John Wick.
No, his daughter gets kidnapped by Mexican drug dealers in the
Okay,
new
so
one.
it's Taken.
So it's taken
Yeah.
with, like, a more racist guy.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's racist.
I think, yeah.
Liam Neeson's probably more racist than Sylvester Stallone,
Oh, well, as a person.
based on evidence.
Yeah,
but,
but-
is John Rambo more racist? John Rambo is definitely
Yeah, I
more
meant the
racist
character,
than whatever the guy from Taken's name is. I think it's just Liam Neeson.
You know what other movie was, like, super...
Qui-Gon Jinn. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah. What other movie was super ill-timed? Kind of like the Punisher Warzone thing, is that Death Wish remake with Bruce Willis, where it was just this, like, celebration of gun culture that came out, like, right between a bunch of other mass shootings.
Nah, I don't even know what that is. Yeah.
No, you ever saw that original movie, the Charles Bronson one?
Yeah.
Yeah, they remade it a few years ago with Bruce Willis. It looked terrible.
When you're talking about Sylvester Stallone, it reminded me, there's this, you ever seen a movie Copland?
No.
So Copland's like, I think it's like a late 90s movie. It's like Ray Liotta and Sylvester Stallone, I think Robert
Oh,
De
man.
Niro. And it's basically
Wow,
about
that's
like, it's basically about a bunch
Is
of,
this a gangster movie?
it's basically a bunch of crooked cops who live in Jersey, like outside of New York.
That's it, yeah, for
and
that
they
cast,
live
that
in
sounds
like this
right.
town, and they're kind of like, they kind of do whatever they want, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Sylvester Stallone is like the local cop. Like, they're New York cops living in Jersey doing whatever they want. He's like the actual cop
How
of
are
the
the
town.
accents in it?
It's rough sometimes, but it's all about like corrupt cops and violence and all this shit.
Yeah.
But it's so funny. Sylvester Stallone, it's like a serious movie, and he still talks like he sounds.
Talks.
And I swear to God, dude, there's like a scene
It's
where
like
they're like,
Schwarzenegger,
they're
yeah.
like, yeah, he just talks like that because he like took some hits to the head. Yeah, they like literally
Holy shit.
explain it away, and I remember thinking like, oh my God, they
if
like wrote that in why he talks like that.
That was ad-libbed for sure.
Yeah.
What if there's a line in every single Stallone movie somewhere that's just, like
Explains his voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's like, and they're like, why does he sound like that? Oh, he's a little bit special or something. Like, they literally say that. Like, I remember just being like, oh my God.
What country is Christopher Walken from?
America.
Why does he talk like that?
I don't know.
I'm not
tried to-
insulting him.
He's
I love
being
it.
dramatic.
I,
They
I
tried
love
to-
Christopher Walken.
People have tried to explain it. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
he
like
doesn't
what
have.
part of-
He doesn't have an accent.
He just speaks like him. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah.
Shatner-esque.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Though I feel like he was going for some sort of TV melodrama thing and then
Yeah.
buggled it up and then they just... Does he talk like that normally?
Who?
Shatner.
No, I don't,
outside
I
of-
don't know. I don't
He
care.
had an album where he sang.
Yeah, that's kind of like, is Zach Brannigan kind of based off
Yes,
of
yeah.
Shatner's character, like his persona?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, Halloween is almost upon us. And what better way is there to end our spooky, scary series this month than by diving into what many call the very definition of survival horror in games as we know it. Resident Evil, or Biohazard for you Japanese listeners, is a long-running IP that still today continues to dominate not only the interactive space, but has even went on to spawn everything from terrible live-action movies to toys to comic books, all since its initial launch on the PS1 in 1996. As of recording right now, there have been 25 releases in the video game franchise alone, and that's not including the near endless amounts of remasters either. Remakes, though, Those are different. Now, while not all of them have achieved quite the same level of accomplishment, there are literally entries in both some of the top-rated and lowest-rated titles ever on Metacritic. Its success has been undeniable for legendary company Capcom. And with over 92 million units sold across the series on all of its many hosted platforms, it remains high up at the #1 spot for their most profitable product line, while also being the 20th best-selling gaming franchise overall, right next to The Legend of Zelda.
Ooh.
It's
Wait,
Yeah.
Capcom, the Monster Hunter guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
The God Hand guys.
I thought Monster Hunter
wait, did they do that?
I thought Monster Hunter became their best-selling.
That was their best-selling single title, Monster Hunter World, I think.
Oh, I thought the franchise beat out Resident Evil finally.
You know,
well, not finally.
Yeah, I'm not...
You know what I mean?
Its monumental place in history with the medium is inarguable. Without the original RE and its use of environmental exploration, inventory management, and puzzle solving, all mixed with raw scares, somber music, and B-movie gore, there wouldn't be a Silent Hill, a Fatal Frame, an Eternal Darkness. Beyond that, there likely wouldn't even be a Dead Rising, a Left 4 Dead, a Dead Island, or that very special extra Call of Duty co-op mode that's big enough to have its own standalone title at this point. And why do you think that is for that second batch I mentioned there? Fucking zombies.
Ooh.
Even goddamn zombie grandfather George Romero credits Resident Evil in bringing the shambling undead into 21st century culture.
Nice.
Writer-director Alex Garland, the current best in movie sci-fi in my opinion, cites it as a primary influence on his 28 Days Later script, while Shaun of the Dead star and co-writer Simon Pegg openly tips his hat to it as well for reigniting the trend for us all. And that film later paved the road for projects like Zombieland and Warm Bodies. It all spiders out. And I mean, who...
Spider's nice, dude.
Yeah. Are they Resident Evil?
They are, yeah.
That's spooky.
Snakes, too.
That's
And I mean,
not Halloween themed, though.
who knows really if World War Z as a property or the Walking Dead empire could exist in its same popular format if Resi never graced the PlayStation 23 years ago. Yeah, perhaps not all its resulting inspirations would prove to be the best. My point is its importance. And not just in large, scale impact as I stop name dropping, but in personal ones too. You could maybe say I was just the right age for it, but it's just that original 96 release, that was my first ever real exposure to horror as a concept. And I don't think that's a thing you ever really forget.
That's right, you grew up in the suburbs.
That first feeling of simulated fear. Being scared from something someone made is a powerful emotion. Some people seek it out, others hide from it. We even laugh at it on a few occasions.
Hider, right here.
There's camaraderie in it. Just the imagery of that game alone, its sound and ambience, atmosphere, reading its twisted journals, jumping at the zombie dogs crashing through the hallway windows, cracking up with my neighborhood friends at that opening FMV cutscene, and just awful translated voice acting. They're honestly some of my finest gaming memories as a little kid. But anyway, enough gushing, and you guys just wait till you hear my Tetris opening. It's time for us to talk about how this watershed saga came to be. I'm Randall Beatrice, here with partial Resident Evil enthusiast Austin Blakesley.
Recent Resident Evil enthusiast.
And non-Resident Evil enthusiast Chris Antuano.
I've played like 2 or 3 of them, but
Okay.
barely. So before you get going, you said it's called Biohazard in Japan?
Yes.
So is Resident Evil 7 called Biohazard 7 Biohazard?
No, it's called Biohazard 7 Resident Evil. And
Yeah.
then here it's called Resident Evil 7 Biohazard.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
Also-
the fucking Roman numeral being the 7. It's
yeah,
great.
the coolest title treatment ever.
Yeah.
Because they didn't put a 7 on it. So in America, it says Resident Evil, but the V, I, and then the leftmost line in the L are orange, so it's a 7
Yeah,
Roman
yeah, yeah.
numeral. And then in the
But they had to
Japanese
redo it,
one,
yeah.
in the Japanese one, it's Biohazard, but the Z, except for the bottom line, is orange because it's a 7.
Nice.
Whoever designed that.
Yeah, it's so cool.
It's really cool. It's brilliant. All right, so you guys ready? Let's enter the world of survival horror.
Yeah. Well, let's just say this is it. This is the last episode of
It is.
Halloween.
Halloween.
I hope
We'll
you enjoyed
bring back-
it. A month's worth of spooky shit.
Yeah.
I think we've been
Yeah.
doing pretty good so far.
We had to cut that one about oh damn it! I was trying to think of something wildly inappropriate that wasn't like too inappropriate.
We'll just bleep it. Just edit a bleep into there.
Add a bleep there. That'd be-
We had to cut the one about.
We had to cut redacted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting here is that it's actually kind of difficult to get into the history of Resident Evil Biohazard without first telling the story of Sweet Home, a little-known survival horror RPG released exclusively in Japan for the Famicom in 1989. It was also developed and published by Capcom and was based on a Japanese film of the same name, a movie that a few of us even watched in preparation last Sunday. So I will say it is up in its entirety to watch on YouTube for free and without any ads. Supposedly the production company affiliated with the project is no longer around, making its distribution technically not illegal, as no other studio appeared to have purchased the assets. This was great news for us since it did not look to be available to stream or buy anywhere that we could find.
Yeah.
But yeah, I recommend checking it out for those interested, especially during this time of year. The quality of that rip is also good and has English subtitles, of course. Me and a good buddy of ours, Matt, rather enjoyed it. You and Chelsea seemed indifferent. I don't know.
It was fine.
Yeah. I'm not saying it was like amazing by any means, but I thought it was fun.
I think you and Matt liked it because it's like nostalgic, like an old horror movie.
Yes, it's very
I think
Criterion.
old horror movies are kind of stupid.
I was impressed by some of the effects, and I still think that initial concept is cool. It's simple. It certainly doesn't waste any time jumping in either, which I like.
Yeah, spoiler, when that chick melts, that was a cool effect.
That was cool. Plus, I got a real kick out of seeing the all the early aspects of things that would later become Resident Evil staples. The house key alone that they show. And
Just a scene where somebody opens a door and that's it. It's just black everywhere else except for the door.
The entire design, too, of the property that the characters are staying in, like, still continues to inspire RE in many ways that I believe are very apparent. There's one particular scene that might as well be the box art for Resident Evil 7. It's great. Anyway, the premise for both the movie and the tie-in video game each revolve around the story of a team of 5 filmmakers exploring an old abandoned mansion in search of finding the precious frescoes hidden there. Frescoes being a technique of mural painting executed upon freshly laid or wet lime plaster. This is a term that we did have to look up while watching. I think you Googled it because I didn't know what they were referring to. But as you probably guessed it, shit goes wrong, place is mad haunted. I don't want to spoil anything more, just in case. However, you can already see the Resident Evil in the setup there. Even 7, I mentioned, brought back the camera crew angle again, which I loved. Not to mention the setting of there being a paranormal, like, female presence following everyone, along with a tragic tale involving a family that once lived there. It's yeah. But what are the actual mechanics of the game itself that would have to follow all these ideas? Well, good thing for you guys that we got the direct scoop, because friend of the podcast that I just brought up before, Matt, found and ordered me a copy of Sweet Home for us to try out, which we did the other night. Except this one was fully translated and copied to an NES cart for us Americans to have here across the pond. Some dedicated fans out there eventually gave up on the dream of it ever being localized outside Japan and took it upon themselves to passionately make a true unofficial reproduction, giving us English speakers the opportunity to see just what exactly this thing was going for, which was kind of neat. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not really into JRPGs, but this game was kind of ambitious as all fuck. Like, for the time, even removing the cross-media nature of it, like, it's kind of crazy to look back on now. Basically, the simple version is you've got your party of characters from the film that you can switch between. You search through the mansion. It's dark and intricate, making it easy to get lost. You encounter hostile enemies while trying to keep everyone alive. Weapons are limited. Health is limited. There are quick time events, which are super rare for the time. You manage, cool. You manage an inventory for all your found items. You solve various puzzles to progress. You revisit rooms, kind of like Metroid style. Much of the story is told through reading notes or diary entries picked up throughout the environment, which is very similar. Like, there are multiple endings too, depending on who lives and who dies in your party.
That's from 1989?
Yeah. But I don't know, what did you think, Austin, from what you saw in it?
I don't ever want to play it.
Yeah. It was enjoyable to watch.
Cool.
Yeah.
Because, like, the whole idea is that you have the 5 characters from the movie.
Yes. They all have, like, distinct abilities, I think,
you, like,
too.
walk around with their party of 5, but then you can also split them into separate parties and literally split up and explore different sides of the mansion.
The other group will stay there.
And then you can just, like, switch on the fly between them and go back to the other party who might be on, like, the other side of the mansion. And then it's like...
I think Resident Evil tried to do that again with Zero, like, years later.
What's it look like?
Top down.
Top down. It kind of looks like a Final Fantasy, like an old school Final Fantasy.
That's what I'm picturing.
Yeah. And like, yeah, the quick time events are like you'll be walking and randomly it'll be like a chandelier's falling. What do you want to do? A duck, dive left, dive right.
It's a bit aggressive with the random encounters.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, it breaks the pacing a little bit. I was talking to Matt when we were playing this, but one of the things I actually like a lot about what Pokemon did when that came out was have very specific areas where random battles would happen rather than just everywhere, few feet.
Yeah.
So you could kind of avoid it if you weren't looking to engage with that stuff, but this game is just like every foot. Like,
yeah.
It seemed pretty unforgiving too. They definitely don't explain shit when you boot it up. It literally just like right into it.
But it's neat.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, what's that? There's a line in the game where he's like, "We're trapped in the home of residing evil."
Yeah.
And me, you, and Matt just went, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's the thing."
That was pretty good. And you can't forget the blood and guts either. All of these elements would absolutely go on to become vital parts of Resident Evil. It even showcases the iconic door opening animation that would later return as a way to mask the PlayStation 1's loading times.
Yeah.
But it's great. This is all like an 8-bit NES game that I'm talking about. Like, if we didn't say what you'd think, you just would picture something modern like in your head. But all of it, contained precursors that would still get used decades later. There were also plenty of other features, though, that would not go on to be comparable to Resi. For starters, I did say that at its core, it is a role-playing game.
Turn-based combat.
Yeah. The encounters with those supernatural bad guys would send the game into a first-person view for turn-based menu combat. As Austin said, it's definitely like you're going through... like
it looks
you can
like RPG Maker.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. Players would get experience points and unlock moves for those fighting in their party. Up to, I think you could have 3 people at once with you. You can split them off into groups of 2 or 3 or 1.
Confusing menus and items
just
that
like Resident Evil.
you don't really know what to do with.
That control scheme with only having 2 buttons definitely made learning that stuff a little rough at first. There was also one other major thing that would separate this title from our game in question today, and that was the permadeath. If one of those 5 characters are killed, they would permanently remain dead for the rest of the game.
What the fuck?
Yeah, now while there are technically ways to revive said party members, it does demand specific items, and it is not a simple task. I don't think we lost anybody from where we are. We played for like 3 hours, 4 hours.
To be fair, you lost a lot of people. You just abused that reset button on that NES.
Yeah. Yeah, and it does have a save system.
It does.
Yeah, well, like you can save anywhere you are. If it didn't have that, then we'd truly be fucked.
Because that repo card works pretty well, but it did freeze a couple times too. So
it froze when we it was running on a console from '85.
Yeah.
That was way before I was born. So I think anytime we pulled the controller a little hard, but otherwise we got through it.
Yeah.
Now, Resident Evil was never known for being the easiest game to get through in your first try, but Sweet Home is downright unforgivable. One tiny slip up on a rickety floor, or forget an item, and your character could be out for the count. It's pretty, it's pretty brutal. So who the F made this thing, and why ain't I heard of it until now, I guess? I've been shooting at Zambos for years. Well, the game's director was Takuro Fujiwara. This dude was an absolute legend at Capcom, even by this point. He was lead on Ghosts and Goblins, Puyan, Bionic Commando. He even helped produce Mega Man with Kenji Inafune. Nice. Hot off of Strider, Fujiwara was commissioned to start work on Sweet Home and for it to be complementary to the film, a film that was technically still in production at the time. He even toured the movie set to gather inspiration, and director Kiyoshi Kurosawa actually gave Fujiwara permission to take some liberties with the game's script, as long as he was able to also supervise the production on the video game as well. This actually wasn't the only shared staff, which I find very interesting when you think of how tie-in products are made these days. In fact, both the game and the film share the same executive producer as well, Mr. Juzo Atami, who unfortunately would suffer from a bizarre death years later involving a staged suicide from falling after members of the press published evidence that he was having an extramarital affair.
What the fuck?
The incident supposedly was orchestrated by members of the Yakuza when the group became angry at the portrayal of the gang in Atami's anti-Yakuza satire film, Minbo no Ana, a controversial movie that he had already been attacked and beaten and slashed for several times only 6 days after its release. This display of terrible violence on such a public figure actually did lead to the crackdown on the Yakuza by the Japanese government.
Jeez.
Now we just
That's
make fun of
fucking
them
wild.
in video games, I guess, right? Like considering the
like
Yakuza
it's
series
nothing.
and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I believe Sweet Home was his last acting role as well.
That's pretty cool to share, like, producer and all that stuff. Like, that's how it should be done, probably.
Yeah,
Like, that's
totally.
probably-
I agree.
You should make him tie in, you know?
Hmm. They were clearly passionate about this. Like,
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, like they did with the Avatar video game. Remember that? James Cameron was involved.
The game was called James Cameron's Avatar.
Really? I didn't know that. I was just thinking about how bad the Avengers video game is going to be, and it's like, you couldn't have an easier subject matter to make a video game about. Like,
Yeah. We'll see, I guess, but not holding my breath.
It's like Destiny, but with Iron Man.
dude, nothing will beat that Hulk video game where you could rip cars in half and smash them onto your fists.
Yeah, Ultimate Destruction.
Is that what that is?
Yeah. Way better than either of the Hulk films.
Oh, yeah, of course.
All right, so game is in full production while things on set are finishing up as well. I promise we'll get into Resident Evil real soon. Sorry. During this process, the movie's director, Kurosawa, reminded game director Fujiwara to not really concern himself with following their story exactly and to basically have fun with it. This led to the game's plot having all those several different endings diverging from what we saw the other night, which was a very unprecedented idea at the time. To have a video game like expand on a feature film's narrative this way.
Yeah.
It's cool.
That seems like a lot to put on a cartridge, isn't it? Just like your typical gray fucking bullshit.
Yeah. But I won't delve too much in the development of Sweet Home today, as we still have much left to cover. So let's just skip ahead and say the game is officially released on December 15th of '89. Still in the same year as its movie counterpart, but more around its home video launch rather than its theatrical run. Despite simultaneous promotions for commercials and trailers of both products being shown together, which is cool. Like there are literally like trailers for the film, and then it's contrasted against footage of this game. Like they were
That's
planning
pretty cool.
from the beginning. It felt like.
That's a good way to do it.
I want to show Chris this picture. This is the quote.
Oh, is that the Residing Evil?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It says, "You must escape this house of residing evil."
And we'll get into. I remember you reminded me that we very much have to talk about why Resident Evil is called Resident Evil as well, because that's also fun, very funny.
Is it because attending really evil was taken?
No, but Biohazard may have been.
What about medical intern? Not that bad a guy. Was that taken?
That's the guy down.
Get it? All right, I'm out.
But response to this game was good. In fact, many critics believed it was even better than the film itself. It even sold well enough too, although apparently not enough for Capcom to pursue a release in any other territory. Many claimed it was due to the RPG nature of it, not being, as well accepted of a genre outside of Japan.
Well, in 1989, no, we just wanted football and hockey games.
Yeah, here in the Western market, especially, that could have been some influence, sure. Others will still stand by the fact that the title also featured some pretty gruesome imagery. It seems, pretty innocuous now, but that Nintendo was still pretty dissuaded from attempting any localization because of it. Remember that video games were just starting to get a little more kickback from that sort of thing here in the States than over there.
It took. They had to make it a white guy with a mustache in order for us to play a Japanese game.
Yeah.
From Brooklyn. Well, all of that and the actual Sweet Home film itself would have been an unknown property here, considering it's Japanese-only release. But that's the story of Gone Home. So what do you guys say we skip ahead? Sweet Home? God, I did that earlier, too, didn't I?
You keep calling it Gone Home. It's not the story of Gone Home.
Yeah, it's a future episode. So what do you guys say we fast forward again a few years? And No?
Can you just talk about what everybody specifically did in those few years?
Hey, everybody was just sitting around.
Lunch, breakfast, dinner, all that stuff.
When I was doing research on the for the Tetris episode, I found people that were documenting as much information about the game as I could, and I got to one point where they had a lot of personal information about Alexei Pajitnov's life, which was very interesting until I got to the part where it was talking about his diet, and I was like, listen, I love Tetris, but this doesn't seem entirely necessary. I don't think this is going to make it into our...
Do you think when he packed his lunch, he was like... turn. Trying to fit his thing in.
The lunchbox? Just like...
Yeah, he fit it all perfectly and then it disappeared.
Damn it! There's a table.
So Fujiwara was proud of his work on the title, but he was also pretty frustrated by the Famicom's graphical limitations at the time. By 1993, he and Koji Oda were already trying to attempt a redesign, but now it was going to be on the Super Famicom. He had twice the bits to work with this go-around.
Nice.
Or wait, that math might not be right. I think you explained bits in a previous episode.
He had about 16,000 more colors to work with.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The only problem was that with the evolving tech also came more ambition. This was when Fujiwara brought in Shinji Mikami as director, a relatively new, albeit very talented young game designer that he was mentoring, whose previous works included licensed titles such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Goof Troop, and Disney's Aladdin.
Wait, Shinji Mikami did Aladdin?
Yeah.
That's why it's dope.
Yeah, I was about to say, wasn't that game like notoriously good?
That's also why it's
Yeah.
hard as shit.
Yeah.
This decision would later become a huge part of Resident Evil getting its signature identity.
What? That it's an Arab prince? I don't get the connection.
No, not the Aladdin game. Speaking of, this was also around the time in '94 that the Sony Play Space Station would catch their eye.
Ooh.
Or no, the No Space Station. Sorry, this is when it was one word, right?
Yeah, the actual PlayStation.
The actual PlayStation. Upon viewing early tech demos of seeing what the system could achieve with real 3D, the idea was proposed of making a remake as an entirely first-person experience. A remake of Sweet Home. I almost did it again.
First person from the beginning.
Yeah, for maximum horror immersion.
Yeah.
A prototype was even made with its only screenshot being almost reminiscent of Doom. However, the concept was obviously later dropped due to certain constraints as well as a change in vision, and thus it wouldn't get revisited again in the mainline series all the way up until Resident Evil 7 in 2017.
Could you imagine a video game company now making a licensed game and then being like, we fucked it up the first time, but
so
now
many
that
years
the
later-
PS5 is out, we're gonna try to make Cars 3 the video game again.
What movie property that's X many years old would just be the most
Yeah, we're gonna make Peter Jackson's King Kong
Again.
again, but for the Xbox 3 or whatever it's called.
Actually, you know what? The King Kong game was awesome.
Yeah, I know. I
First of
kinda
all.
like
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, but the graphics weren't there.
It would be
true.
hilarious though if they tried to do that after another King Kong movie already came out in the meantime, and it was
Yeah.
based off the old one. But no, it's just funny to see.
That's crazy.
in,
It was
like-
going to be first person right away.
Yeah, and we'll get into that again later. 'cause
You know,
that stuff's
first
kinda
person
cool.
scary. You know what's scarier? Making it so hard to aim that I never want to play this game.
Hey, it adds to it. The tension. You don't understand. I just find it interesting that it just seems like RE7 is like the true vision of what the first entry was kind of supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody hated it.
No, they didn't.
Why? I
It's
thought it was
dead
really
forever.
good.
It was very much
I
beloved.
know. That's what I'm saying. It didn't
Oh,
sell,
they
it
didn't
didn't
lo-
sell as well.
And no, it sold well. It just didn't sell. Like when companies have stupid expectations, like Square Enix does it a lot too, where they're like, "What do you mean our reboot of Tomb Raider didn't sell 45 million copies?" Meanwhile, it went on to sell like 12, and they're like, "No, not good enough." Because RE7 sold like 7 million copies or something, or 6 or 7 million copies. That's really good.
Oh, yeah.
But they're like, that's not Call of Duty numbers. It's, I don't know. The unrealistic expectations that
It is.
these companies have for
That's
games.
not
sometimes
Call of
is
Duty
absurd.
Because it's not just shooty bang bang video game. It's got
Well, I guess
substance.
sorry, Call of Duty's a Western thing. I should have said it's not like Monster Hunter numbers or
That
the
game's
best
dumb.
thing Capcom's ever
Come at
made.
me. Hey, you know what'd
yeah,
be
I'm being for those listening, I'm being sarcastic.
You
Monster
know what'd be
Hunter
cool?
can suck
Let's
it.
make a crazy action game where you fight giant monsters. That does sound dope. Okay, but we'll give it fighting game controls and we'll make it the slowest imaginable action possible.
That's why Lost Planet is the
Yeah.
best Monster Hunter game.
I was
Yeah.
playing The Witcher the other day, and you know what I thought?
Lost
I
Planet
don't have
1.
to sharpen my sword enough. Monster Hunter.
Yeah, I was playing The Witcher and I was like, you know what would make this battle with this hard creature already even just a little bit harder? If I want to do attack, I have to left, right, X, up, B, A, forward. And then if it's just a fourth of a degree angle off, it'll miss it completely.
Oh my
And then I
god!
had to wait a minute to finish the animation.
Hearing our friends try and to get that like party system working,
That's
the
why I
multiplayer.
quit.
Oh, I tried to
Holy
do that
shit.
with a...
What?
I don't know who it was. I made them download it when it came
What
to
in the
Game Pass,
world?
and we were
Oh,
trying
it
to
is
like
like- yeah,
play,
it's
and
on
I
Game
was like,
Pass.
"Oh my god, it's like so annoying."
They're like,
Isn't there
you
like a
can-
flare
your
that you
friend-
have to like send
You know,
out?
your friend can join the mission to play with you, but they can't
Yeah.
join during any cutscenes. So you have to watch the cutscenes and then invite people.
Hmm.
And they also have to be in the same world as you because the worlds are only 16 players.
But you can't share a social hub. Like the social hubs are individuals, I think, and it's just very convoluted.
Does it at least keep people with you? Because our friends
No.
kept having to do it over and over.
You have to do it every time.
Jeez. Ugh. So anyway, Argon.
That's a real scary video game.
Fuck, I almost did it again. So the game was then repitched instead as a third-person title, but now with all the pre-rendered backgrounds to use as much as the tech as they could. This is why the characters themselves only appeared as real-time polygonal figures, while everything else behind them seemed to be so realistic. The models were basically superimposed, causing them to really pop out.
Yeah.
This also
That
was...
was always bizarre. It kind of reminded me of Final Fantasy, like how like
yeah.
it's static backgrounds
It-
with.
you know what it reminded me of?
characters
Some
on
old
top.
Hanna-Barbera cartoons where you could see, like, you notice a
Oh,
lot in
yeah,
something
you
like
could tell.
Scooby-Doo, like which objects they're going to interact with and which ones they aren't.
Yeah.
This was a little bit more, I think, like, of an
Wow,
evolution
could you
of that.
imagine if
but
that first game was first person? It probably would have been scarier if you had to move like that.
That's what made 7 so
slow.
fucking scary.
Like,
and
if you
then
had to-
fiddle with the controls.
Yeah.
This also was what led to the fixed camera perspective as well, a token mainstay for an endless amount of future titles to come, both in and out of the franchise. But this change didn't exactly come out of nowhere. During production, Mikami discovered 1992 PC game Alone in the Dark, which heavily influenced him to adopt their more cinematic style. He even later said that if it wasn't for Alone in the Dark, that the original Resident Evil probably would have tried to stick with the first-person view instead.
That makes sense. I
Oh.
don't think the tech was there to make first person as cinematic
No.
as.
Not back then.
That's why Call of Duty campaigns blew so much like
Yeah.
fucking minds
So,
back then.
you know what's
Very
interesting?
cinematic,
Uh,
cool things done with first person.
This isn't even in my thing, but I went back and played the original Alone in the Dark like years after I got into Resident Evil. And I didn't much care for it too much, and I didn't dislike it. Like I understood what it was going for. It just felt very. It felt even more dated than going back to what playing RE1 would be now. And that's still not to say it's not incredibly important, but I think there was a preview episode where we were talking about something, and you were talking about when a game does something better, and it's
Yeah.
like you can acknowledge and respect like where something takes things from,
Yeah.
but you can also
Understand.
you also like you also retain the right to be like this did it right.
Oh yeah, I had that conversation
Yeah.
with Borderlands 3 recently. I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah, it feels like Destiny, and I respect it, but Destiny still did it better.
Now it's kind of hard to say how well that first person how those systems would have turned out. Our director was supposedly at first very hesitant with the change to the fixed camera, stating it, quote, had an effect on immersion, making the player feel a bit more detached. It's just once he saw what dev kits were capable of with the pre-rendering of those backdrops, the high levels of detail they could achieve over the 3D FPS view of the initial draft, the decision then became a no-brainer, especially considering the issues that version was dealing with, in which he later claimed that first build, quote, didn't get along so well with the original PlayStation specs. I can't say I remember many first-person shooters on the PlayStation, or first-person games in general. Was Kingsfield on the... I mean, there was probably a version of Doom and Wolfenstein on PlayStation. They ported those to everything, but
Yeah, off the top of my head.
not like the N64 where you had GoldenEye and Turok and Perfect
What
Dark and
about
stuff.
Medal of Honor?
Ooh, yeah, that's all right.
That's probably like
yeah.
Wait, wasn't Turok also on the PlayStation?
No, I think Turok was just on N64 and PC. You saw that with certain games like Shadows of the Empire and stuff, I think.
Doom, Quake,
Oh,
Quake.
Duke Nukem, Medal of Honor.
All right, there's more than that. Yeah, there's
a
Medal of
couple
Honor, like I
James
said.
Bond games, a couple Alien games.
The Tomorrow Never Dies game was third person.
Also
I'll
thought
have you
about
know.
the Alien games. Yeah.
Star Wars Dark Forces,
Yeah, I remember
Whoa,
that.
there's a version of Dark Forces on PS1?
apparently.
I wonder how that is.
South Park, the video game.
That was on the N64 as
Yeah,
well.
I
That
remember
game's
the
terrible.
N64 version.
I had the PlayStation version.
Boy.
Yeah.
At least South Park would get a good game a decade and a half later.
Army Men, Sarge's Heroes.
That was third person.
Oh.
That was on the N64 as
Rainbow
well.
Six.
Yeah,
that
and
was my
that's
first-
on the PlayStation Classic or whatever.
When you
Yeah.
were saying
that is a bad version of that game.
yeah, when you were
It's a
saying
very
Resident
bad
Evil could have the first one could have been first person, I thought Rainbow Six immediately, like that it would have
Yeah,
felt.
well,
like
I
it
think
looked
Rainbow
similarly.
Six came out in 2000 after the DualShock controller came out because the PlayStation controller didn't have joysticks initially. So, yeah.
Yo, you remember the last mission on the N64 Rainbow Six where you couldn't get seen by anybody?
That game is impossible from the
It is
beginning.
fucking possible. I was just thinking about I actually just had like a real anxiety flashback
Yeah.
for a second when you
At
brought
least
up.
that game had split screen. I don't think the PlayStation one did.
Oh, by the
I
way,
would subject my friends to
Rainbow Six did have controls where you didn't have the dual analog sticks because the PlayStation Classic doesn't have
Right.
dual analogs, and they are garbage.
I think there are like certain you have to like hold down like select and a trigger to like look up and down or something.
Yeah.
It's
something like
It's
that.
rough.
Sounds like a blast.
Yeah.
As opposed to the N64 obviously
what you were talking
PC
about.
version that you can
Yeah.
It's like we are talking about with Monster Hunter. They're like, all right, breach this door. There's a guy behind you. Shoot him. And you're like, okay, L2, select, triangle, R1.
The
You
game
ever
just
see
shuts off.
the Giant Bomb Quick Link where they couldn't figure out how to open a door because the
Yeah.
action button is like 3 buttons. Like
Yeah.
like you can't just walk up to a door and like hit square to open it. You have to like go into action mode. Like, and it's only on this version of the game. It's not like that on the other consoles. But like
That's funny.
and the other platforms. But
Yeah.
even so, though, the use of all those PS1 tools at their disposal and with all those extra polygons, this was allowing so much more than what they ever thought was possible before. This, of course, only led to fuel more ideas, which in turn convinced the higher-ups at Capcom to want to staff up the team. The PlayStation was already set to be out soon in Japan, but its launch lineup wasn't exactly full of any killer apps yet. It would be huge for them if they could get something on the platform for sale that people never saw before, especially on a console. And especially for us here in the West. Now, like something that we would find appealing when the Play non-Space Station would hit there. Sony was absolutely down for all this. Remember, this was going to the cool console for everyone after all, including adults who were over kiddie platformers. The
Yeah,
thing-
at that point, if you go back and listen to our PlayStation episodes,
Yes,
you can see
yeah.
at
Yeah.
that point they were looking for fucking anything to
Yes.
help them, get out ahead of
which was
Nintendo.
incredibly smart.
Yeah.
Like, and I think even in your Sega episode, you brought up like the importance of third parties at that point.
Oh
which,
yeah. especially in that era, nobody
Totally.
had like the monopoly except for Nintendo to be able to like.
And the
do
the biggest thing separating the Super Nintendo from the N64 is like a lot of those staple third parties that Nintendo would work with shifted over.
Yeah.
Like Capcom and Konami and everything. It's if they didn't see what the PlayStation was in this story, presumably they probably would have stuck with the Super Nintendo or even the N64.
Oh yeah.
In which case, we couldn't have gotten that live action fucking intro. The thing was, what about all this though is that what brand recognition would an obscure 1989 Japanese horror movie have anywhere else
Yeah.
besides there, or even there? They kept coming up with more and more ways to make this title different. It only made sense to just turn it into its own thing anyway. Thus, the first chapter in our franchise was born. The thing was, Fujiwara was not going to let go of the spooky mansion environment and horror setting. Well, while also still wanting to keep so many of the elements that were present in that initial NES release, or Famicom, sorry.
Yeah, that makes sense why Resident Evil 1, in like the grand scheme of the storytelling, doesn't like necessarily environmentally super fit in. Yeah.
He said, quote, "The basic premise was that I'd be able to do things that I wasn't able to include in Sweet Home, mainly on the graphics front, and that he was, quote, confident that horror games could become a genre in themselves. Creating a title like this was a risky move as there wasn't a lot to really go off of before in this space, not to mention in Japan.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, director Mikami was initially very reluctant of this early on because he, quote, hated being scared. He eventually receded and carried on with the project, but only after he fully understood how exactly it would be frightening. Like, it's I just find it so funny that this, like, director of... It's like if George Romero, like, came
Yeah.
out and was just
Yeah,
like...
zombies creep me out.
Yeah.
I don't really like it.
I like died reading that. I was like, you're telling me the guy responsible for Resident Evil's like, I don't really like spooky stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't play. I guess objectively, you could probably still create like a good.
Well, that's the
Excuse me,
thing.
like
I
a
think
good-
he was into
yeah.
it once he realized, like, he's behind the curtain, so it's not, you know.
That's how I feel. Like,
Yeah?
I feel like I don't really like horror games at all. Like,
Yeah, me
I've
either.
noticed
don't-
that with
I don't like being scared in video games.
Oh,
It's
I
not.
love it
it's
so
it's
much.
not something I look for. But
when it's done well, I should
with
say.
that said,
There's a
I
lot of
have
bad
played
horror
hard games, and there are ones where it's like when you get like enough of a laughable control of the situation, it's almost like, oh, I'm behind the curtain. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
as
yeah.
like, you know.
You know what I had an affinity for a little while was when non-horror games would suddenly become horror games in weird moments.
Yeah.
Like I think things like Ravenholm and Half-Life 2 are extremely
Ew,
effective.
very
Like
scary.
the sound in it, it's terrifying.
Especially,
and it's
like,
such
when you get-
it's just a little chapter of a bigger
Yeah.
thing. Like
well,
it's-
when you get to be honest, like it's not like Half-Life 1 towed the line of
Yeah.
horror, but it had a more sci-fi element
Yeah.
than Resident Evil
I-
did
I
in its
do-
early days. At
I
least.
do feel like realistically, if Half-Life ever became like a feature film, they'd lean into the horror or sci-fi
for
angle more than
sure, yeah.
than what the game.
But yeah, you're
did.
right. I love that when you get out of. I think it's like the sewers you come out of, or like
Yes,
something, and you come
yeah,
out, and
yeah.
it's just like that's like the chapter title, and you're like, ooh, and it's like all this
It
fucking
goes
dark
south
shit.
Or we don't go
Yeah.
to Ravenholm.
Yeah,
that's
yeah, that's right,
which
yeah.
is creepy
I
in
know, it's so
itself.
good,
It's
yes.
so good. Yeah, those chapter names. So let's get into where the world of Resident Evil would come from a little bit. One of the most notable features that gave Sweet Home its identity was its use of environmental storytelling that I mentioned before, and this game needed that lore too. The player needed a reason to want to explore the house after all, rather than just, to escape it.
Yeah.
During the first 6 months of this development,
Yeah, because
Mikami
if it were up to
would,
me, I'd be trying to get the fuck out of here as quick as
and
possible.
I think the first thing I tried to do was open the
Walk
front
out the
door,
front door?
which I think the opening cutscene, like they stop you, like I think Wesker or somebody like is just like, don't open that door or whatever. But then if you tried in the remake, they let you open it, and then a bunch of zombie dogs come in, and I was like, that's funny. But Mikami, during this, he would work on the game alone, like by himself. He created concept sketches, designing characters, and writing over 40 pages of script. Definitely atypical for home console video games of the era.
Yeah, I was actually gonna do a joke. I don't know enough about the Resident Evil storyline, but I was gonna say, all right, the original storyline
pretty
is, and
convoluted.
then I start with like this, this super convoluted fucking 9-game tale.
The funny thing, like I love 7 because it's so removed from that, but it still ties in eventually. Like it's a small part of a bigger
Okay,
thing.
yeah.
But I always find it very weird when even in that game and in all the future games, they're referencing events that happened in their alternate world in the 90s. So they're like, back when all these nukes went off in the United States in 1998, and you're like, man, the series has been going on so long that
Yeah.
like you can't, because they create an alternate future, you have to follow this timeline of what you were committed to initially.
Yeah.
But this was when our director would begin to dive a bit more into horror pop culture from around the world as well, citing Kubrick's The Shining as a huge influence on the design of interiors of the Spencer Mansion, like for their backgrounds. But for every inspirational Romero film he watched, he would also find some that he didn't like or wanted to avoid being compared to, such as the 1979 film Zombie, which I guess I agree with you, Mikami. Like, Dawn of the Dead is a way better movie than Zombie.
Yeah.
But in fact, he was liking George's work so much that it actually became the key factor in altering the psychological Japanese horror setting left over from Sweet Home to instead a more American zombie
Yeah,
setting.
I was gonna say that from what I was
based in
just
raw survival.
yeah,
like, you
from what
know,
I was
like-
looking at in the screenshots of Sweet Home, it seemed very like monstery. Not
Yeah, which is funny because the
necessarily-
movie doesn't actually have a lot of visual representation of what's haunting them. Like, it's mostly shadows and tricks of
yeah.
light and stuff like that.
But classically Resident Evil seems it does. Though they've always made sure that not just be like zombies.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems more zombie centric.
Like,
Where does Resident Evil take place? Did they ever say? Is it fake? Is it real?
I mean, Raccoon City is obviously not real. That's essentially their surrogate New York, kind of
Wait,
like
what?
Gotham. But they always give regions, because the Spencer Mansion is in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, okay.
Just like Resident Evil 7 takes place in Louisiana, but
Right.
I don't think the residence or town is real.
Yeah.
But like, what's interesting here is that the game already featured undead enemies. Like, that first screenshot still had a zombie in it, because there are zombies in Gone Home, even though they're not in the film. But instead, he wanted to push the entire plot to be zombie focused, like how to deal with them and where they came from and who they were. Like, I'm not sure he was expecting Umbrella to become like the most well-known evil corporation in the media. Like, when you think about game cover, like you think about them in Black Mesa, you know, people have Umbrella tattoos and it's on all the merch and stuff like that. Like, it's, you never really
I have
know.
a Black Mesa tattoo.
I know.
That freaks
It's
me out
dope.
every time I see it.
Really?
Because I forget that it's on the back of my arm. So if like I just stretch, I'm like, what the fuck?
I've done that before. This is a weird thing to leave in, but I just think it's funny. When I'm drying my hair out of the shower, I forget I have one on my back shoulder blade because I never see it.
Yeah, and then
so
you're like,
like
"Oh,
for 2
what the-"
seconds, I'm like I think like a bug's on me or something. Like even though it's much larger, but I don't know what it is. Like it. Now, once we had our bad guys, we then needed our good guys, too. Jill, Chris, Wesker, who, of course, during the course of the game would be revealed as the villain. Sorry, spoilers. In case it wasn't
whoa,
more obvious. He has the most gruff voice and sunglasses. It's so stupid. But we had,
Hey,
we
I'm
had
the
our
good guy.
Yeah. But we had the Stars team, which I always like the name of their thing.
Isn't it an acronym?
Yeah.
It is,
Something
yes.
tactical assault.
Damn it, look it up.
Something?
I'm gonna look it up.
The fan of me is like real angry at myself right now. This was our cast of characters, minus a black comic relief character and a big cyborg for some reason, who would later become Rebecca Chambers and Barry, respectively. Probably a smart change there, but
Yeah.
Turns out if you Google
game wouldn't go
stars,
through some-
Resident Evil doesn't come up.
you know, did you all caps it?
Is it the
Did you
network?
put periods in between each? Oh, the star. No, that's spelled differently. There's a Z
No,
in there.
it comes up with the Dallas Stars. Maybe that's because I look up hockey more than most people.
Google knows.
Special Tactics and Rescue Service.
Okay. Yeah, at some point.
I got one word right. Tactic.
Yeah.
Tactical.
The studio also wanted the cast to like feel alive, and despite owning their own motion capture studio facility at the time, instead opted for all of the movements to be fully animated for the characters.
Capcom?
Yeah.
Oh, probably for Street Fighter. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, why the fuck did they have a mocap studio?
Granted, motion capture studios back then were, I'm sure, not
Yeah.
what they are now.
Wait,
Well,
it wouldn't make sense for Street Fighter.
There's
That's
still
all,
Why not?
that's all 2D.
Yeah,
I
but
mean-
they wouldn't still map out like the movement.
why
or you
would
think,
Capcom have a?
You're right. I guess they would.
More like Mortal
No, 'cause-
Kombat did, but
Yeah,
that's
it's all-
it wasn't them.
Yeah, actually, Mega Man's all mocap.
There had to be some game. I'm trying to think of Capcom. It says that they had one. I don't,
Weird.
unless they just never
Movie related.
really
maybe.
used it.
Yeah, I don't know. Japan companies are weird. Maybe they did it for like movie production or something.
Yeah. But the artists like designing here would be referred to specific books and videos in order to study how people, spiders, and other animals encountered in the game would behave. And while it's easy to look back at the stuff and laugh now, there weren't exactly other titles around going for what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
With production at this point being kind of completely underway now, the development team had grown upwards to about 40 people, especially during the end. Almost all of this work was done on Silicon graphics hardware using the software program Softimage. I say almost because there is still a matter of that one particular Fantastic Edition that we can't get into just yet, although you know is coming. I think I may have said it earlier, but whatever.
Full motion something.
I thought you would say full nudity.
No.
It's the way of the future,
Yeah.
really. Graphics can't get any better than that.
Then full frontal nudity?
But let's talk reveals. Where did the press and public first know about this thing? Crazy enough, one of its initial behind closed doors appearances would host a demo that actually featured the game being played cooperative locally. A mode that was unfortunately later removed, as McCamey said it technically wasn't good enough. You know, this was in 1995.
It's not
but-
scary enough. As evidenced
And
by
you're too
Resident
busy
Evil
fucking
5.
bouncing into each other.
Yeah, it's stuck in a doorway. Then later that same year, at the annual V-Jump Festival, a revised version of the build would be shown publicly, showcasing the combat and gameplay, but this time with no multiplayer of any kind. Response was good, although the character models and textures at this time were still pretty rudimentary and needed finalizing. In early 96, the title began to make previews in gaming magazines, all under the name Biohazard. I know I've just been calling it by its American title this whole episode. Some of these articles, by the way, even portrayed areas and bosses that would later be cut from the final game. I even believe early versions allowed you to cycle through weapons in real time.
Ooh,
Yeah, what would that been? Everything else, though...
Definitely would have been too easy then.
Yeah. Combining items together, the save feature using the ink ribbons, the revisiting of areas, the gore, that was all there. And people were excited. It sounded like a true survival experience. So, by this point, production was also finally complete. There was, however, just one more thing the developers wanted to include before calling it a day, something that would really stand out from the crowd of its 32-bit competition. And those are those three little letters that Austin said earlier.
FMV.
Yeah. For those who haven't seen it, it's fucking great. I can't even imagine what RE would be these days if they stuck with that aesthetic throughout the whole series. But it should likely all be on YouTube, although honestly, the uncut one that's in color is still fairly hard to find, surprisingly. It's very Evil Dead-like in nature, a lot of low swooping camera angles, like tons of fog, and the makeup and all the blood and guts is real, like, wet-looking.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, it's great, and so dumb. Like, it's honestly even more cornball than you remember, the way it introduces all the characters and the CG monsters and all that. One of the first notable things, also, is that the cast is of American actors, despite the Japanese studio and the fact that it was all even filmed there. This was to remain consistent with the Western setting.
I was going to say, probably.
Yeah, and the fact that all of the releases, including the one in Japan, would use English voice acting for the game itself, which I didn't know that. Captions and text would obviously all be translated, but the marvelous lock-picking and Jill Sandwich lines would remain the same in each territory. Supposedly, Japanese VO performances were still recorded, except they were left unused when Mikami found the quality of the performances inadequate.
I wonder if it just has something to do with the fact that PlayStation was trying to hit, like, everywhere.
Yeah, probably. Like, that initiative.
And it's kind of like a, hey, let's capture American market off the bat.
That probably seemed exotic over there as well. But I just find this absolutely hilarious, by the way, when you consider the quality of the English voice acting.
Exactly.
Even lead programmer Yoshiro Ampo would later comment on this, stating that due to the development staff all being Japanese, those on staff, like on their crew, were completely unaware of the poor performances and were a little bummed to see that it could have, quote, hindered the realism and immersion of the title for the international release. Yeah. This was one of the primary reasons for the redub in the 2002 GameCube remake that we'll get into soon. Speaking of these last editions, now it was time to get the title ready for launch across the world, but not first without running into a few funny problems. The first of which being its name.
Here we go.
Yeah, so I know Austin asked me the other day if I was going to bring this up. But yeah, it turns out Biohazard wasn't going to fly over here in the States or in Europe. The reason why was because of copyright issues. Chris Kramer, director of communications at Capcom, pointed out during the localization process that it would be impossible to trademark that title here in the US. Sega had already released a video game 4 years prior in 1992 called Biohazard Battle. However, they wouldn't even be their biggest competitor in the name game. New York alternative metal band Biohazard were already using the word for everything from their brand awareness to merch to marking dates on release calendars for retailers and press. They kind of had no choice but to look for something different.
And they obviously stood the test of time, so that panned out all right.
Everybody's talking about Biohazard the band.
Yeah.
Yeah, your Biohazard tattoo, though.
Yeah.
It's looking real good.
Yeah, I do feel weird about getting it on my chin, but, you know, I needed to show my appreciation somewhere.
So Capcom instead had the fun solution of running an eternal company contest to find a new name. The studio...
And it was called, like, the McJizz Sandwich. Oh, wait.
Hitler did nothing wrong.
This isn't like when 4chan did their... Oh my god, the fucking Mountain Dew flavor. It was
Granny Gush.
It was Granny... Well, one of them was just called Sierra Mist, which I thought was the funniest.
That's good.
Yeah, but no Bodie McBoatfaces here.
Oh, damn it. I was going to say Zombie McZombie face.
The studio settled on Resident Evil based solely on the Monsters in the Mansion setting, as well as I'm sure that Sweet Home reference. That can't be coincidence.
Yeah, there's no way they didn't think
I
of
know,
that.
yeah.
There's no way that's a coincidence.
The funny thing was, though, Kramer thought the name was, quote, super cheesy. I can't remember what I felt like was a better alternative, he said. Probably something stupid about zombies. but the rest of the marketing crew loved it and were ultimately able to convince Capcom of Japan and Mikami-san that the name fit.
To be honest, like, retrospectively, yeah.
Yeah.
But it is kind of, like, a little on the nose.
I know. I just think that's hilarious, though. And it's just, like
yeah.
It's the most off-the-cuff, like,
yeah.
just like, I don't know, probably something stupid. Here's the funny thing, though. I think I've gone on record maybe saying this here before. You can call it a bias. I love the name Resident Evil. Like, I think it's great. It's campy, it's original, it sums up the type of thing it is, which I think hardly games ever do anymore. It's just plain enjoyable to say. And honestly, it's one of my favorite titles in the business.
Yeah.
Like, in my opinion, I think it's one of the best. Maybe only behind, like, Hotline Miami and Grand Theft Auto. Like, I think Grand Theft Auto is brilliant.
Yeah. You don't like Gears? That's not your favorite name?
Don't make me go on that rant again. But we had our title here in the West. This would lead for new cover artwork to be commissioned as well. Thus, comic book artist Bill Sienkiewicz, whose works include way too much for me to list right now. He drew up the American and European box art. I used to think it was real dumb looking as a kid, but now I think it's kind of great. Probably because it is so dumb looking.
I'm looking.
Yeah, the dude's facial expression on it, it's just mwah. Look at, please Google it.
Is this one?
No, that's the remake.
That's the
Sorry.
remake?
Yeah. Type Resident Evil 6 box art. Or sorry, Resident Evil box art 1996. Yeah. Look at that.
It's like you look like photoshopped giant tarantulas.
Yeah, I do like the big spiders on it.
That's funny.
That Impact red font, though. It's bold.
Yeah.
Anyway, with the name now chosen, there was still, however, a big obstacle left in terms of breaking through the U.S.'s barriers. The issue of its content. While the ESRB, and please look up that trilogy of episodes, and its initiative had only been in effect for less than 2 years now, it doesn't mean studios still didn't have cold feet when it came to portraying on-screen violence. See, over in Japan, they didn't have a pesky rating system to worry about yet. Although across the pond here, the aftershock of Mortal Kombat and Doom were still leaving parents and politicians pretty flustered. Like the dorks they are. So company Capcom decided that the best course of action to avoid a similar controversy would be to just nip it in the bud before it even happened. They especially didn't want Sony to be upset this early in their newer relationship. This meant several considerable changes for the international PlayStation release over the Japanese original, primarily in that opening movie. Remember when I mentioned the color thing before?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a European and North American markets got a black and white cut of it, as opposed to the original one being in color. This was maybe to mask a bit of the blood and gore featured, I guess. Not only that, but there was still tons of other heavier edits in it as well. They replaced shots of mangled corpses with newspaper clippings, removed scenes of disembodied limbs, the part where they have Cerberus, zombie dogs killed Joseph is gone, along with one of the monsters getting shot after. Even the first major scare sequence ended up on the chopping block, like that famous scene where it cuts to the video and the zombie's eating the guy's head and the head drops. That wasn't there in our version here. I'm curious if you guys remember this, because normally it cuts to like a CG scene. I think it's the one colleague, Kenneth, who dies. Sorry, I'm trying to retrace my... But in the Japanese version, the zombie drops the person's bloody head and it like rolls on the floor. Like this was entirely cut out.
That's interesting.
However, this is my favorite. There was one other altered moment that was so fucked up, I'm amazed any country could have ever handled it. It was when character Chris Redfield was shown briefly smoking a cigarette.
Ooh.
Get that shit
what?
out of here.
A what?
Wait, wasn't
Wait, we got
Metal Gear
intro
out
hits on
out or about to come out?
No, that came out in 98.
Okay. So it only took 2 years before
We went cool with SAGs again?
we went from hating cigarettes in a scene to fully having them as an item you can actively use.
Yeah, I think it like mechanically had a purpose in that game.
Yeah.
I mean, it lowered your health, which maybe that's why
It
we
was
thought
so
it
you
was
could
see the
lasers.
Yeah. Despite all these
That's
tweaks,
Kojima
though,
for ya.
it's true. Despite all these tweaks, though, the game was ultimately still released on the PlayStation as one of the first games ever to receive the mature rating from the ESRB.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was all for naught. I don't know. Just ironic to me when you consider how much of their Zero ratings group would crack down on things like this years later, now giving only us bloodthirsty Americans with the uncensored versions of Resi to enjoy.
Yeah,
now,
it kind of flip-flops.
Yeah, like it flip-flops severely, because now Resident Evil 2, the remake, is like very edited over there, as opposed to here when they're like pulling faces apart and shit.
Nice.
Yeah, so with that, our game is just about ready to go gold when one last thing gets brought to the attention of the studio regarding its North American release, and that's rentals. In the mid-90s, we absolutely loved renting games and movies here in the US of A. Now, obviously, these businesses existed all over the world, but they wouldn't catch on everywhere to the degree that they did here. So Capcom, they had a solution. Mikami noted that at the request of the American staff, that the American edition be made harder, just so the title couldn't be rented and completed in a few days. The guy even later stated that this version proved itself to be fairly difficult for their own dev team, who had to play the game very carefully in order to complete it. The auto-aiming function was completely disabled, and the number of ink ribbons found by the player for saving were greatly introduced.
Wait, there was auto aim in that game?
In the Japanese, yeah. They really wanted to do everything they could to keep us English speakers from blasting through it. Yeah. But with all our bows now on top, the groundbreaking title was finally ready to ship. Our director, he was nervous, stating he was worried how well a horror game would really perform. Even producer Fujiwara said the game was originally just targeted towards a core audience and only expected to sell around 200,000 copies. Neither them, nor the team, nor Capcom ever thought it would go on to sell the way it did. And boy, did it ever. But before we get into the numbers, I have to ask, what was your guys' experience with the Resident Evil 1? Not the remake just yet, but did either of you guys play it back in 96? Were you aware of it or the culture kind of around it?
No.
No?
I told you,
alone.
I think I said this in the PlayStation episode.
Oh,
but
maybe.
I didn't play any of the adult games for the PlayStation. I played Spyro and Crash and stuff. I never played the original Metal Gear until way later, and the same with the original Resident Evil.
I played
Yeah.
Final Fantasy, Metal Gear, all Crash and all that shit, but I never played Metal Gear. Or no, sorry, never played Resident Evil.
You referenced Dino Crisis, I think, at one point. Did
Yes,
you?
I have played Dino
That's
Crisis.
so fun. That's the same guy.
yeah, exactly. And it feels exactly the same,
It does.
just dinosaurs.
But it's got dinosaurs in it.
And arguably, like, a couple of years later, or a year or two later,
Yeah,
97
it wasn't that
or
far
something.
past this.
So, I don't know. I'm trying to think of if I act... There's no way I didn't know about it. Maybe I didn't, or I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I might have just come a little bit like later enough to where it was already gone and I wasn't picking it up an old game or something like that, you know?
I know you kind of gave your opinion earlier on horror games, but I was curious if did you ever dabble in like Silent Hill or Fatal Frame? Or...
I've never played a Silent Hill. I
Yeah.
did play one Fatal Frame, but I didn't play very
Yeah.
much of it because it's fucking scary.
It is
I
scary.
should also say that, like, with the exception of the new wave of horror, like I've played Amnesia and stuff like that, never played a horror game other than Resident Evil in my life. I've never seen one second.
That's not true.
Wait, what?
Because there's one very specifically that I'm going to reference later that you love.
Minecraft is a horror game.
All right, well, we'll get there then.
Okay.
I'm talking about, like, I've never seen or played a second of Silent Hill.
Okay.
I've never seen or played a second of... Oh, you going to talk about PT?
No,
Okay,
but that
'cause
is
I've played PT.
Yo, PT's a masterpiece. I think I do reference PT later, but I was talking specifically about Dead Space.
Never... Oh, yeah. I've never played...
I know that's sci-fi action, but
Yeah.
that game's
The
still
first Dead
terrifying.
Space is scary.
Yeah,
It is.
I forgot about that.
They
I
get
mean,
like, progressively less
I know what
and
you mean.
less.
You're
Dino
thinking
Crisis.
strictly horror, like
Is Dino
those.
Crisis horror? I never played that.
Totally also. Yeah.
I
I
never
would say
played
it's like
Silent Hill.
it's light though.
It's
Games,
light, yeah.
Games that tend to lean on the sci-fi element are a little bit easier for me. Like I don't like the gory, like scary lighting kind of tension building. Like granted, Dead Space, the first one definitely does build tension in a lot of
that's got
spots.
some crazy
And-
lighting in
Yeah.
that.
And I played Alien Isolation, which I guess
That
could be
game's
considered a
terrifying. I
horror
love that game, yeah.
But I love Alien and I love sci-fi, and that,
I love sci-fi,
that'll
too.
trump the fucking, scariness every time.
I think by putting a sci-fi tint to it, the pace tends to get sped up a little bit more of a lot
yeah,
of stuff.
okay,
Like
I'll
like
give you that.
they're a little less like brooding in nature.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know.
I never played Silent Hill, never played Fatal Frame, and never played Alone in the Dark. I played the remake of Alone in the Dark. That was a bad game.
I remember that game.
I
yeah.
played Silent Hills.
I never played a
PT.
Silent Hill,
Yeah.
but I've seen them.
Yeah, I played Evil Within.
PT is phenomenal.
I
Evil
played
Within's
Alan
okay.
Wake. Is
that will
that's
come
that
up.
a horror game?
That's more of a thriller, but yeah.
Okay, here, this sentence will show how not okay I am with horror games. It took me 3 years to beat Bioshock 1 because I was too scared.
That's a scary game at times.
That is actually that game's got classical horror
Yeah.
like lighting, and I guess splicers are kind of like until you
There's
really
ghosts
get
in that.
until
Like,
you really
yeah,
get into
like-
the story. Splicers are essentially zombies. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
more or less.
It is interesting to see when you think about how aesthetically different Infinite is and, and stuff like that. Like, yeah. I mean, horror eventually, I think after this generation that we're like talking about the PS1 and PS2, I guess those two generations, horror became more set dressing for games. Like, you still have, but now you have a resurgence of different kinds of horror titles. Like, a lot of horror titles stripped away combat to focus more on becoming like merging walking a simulator with horror.
Yeah.
And I think some of those are much better than others. I'm not particularly a fan of
that's why
Amnesia or Outlast.
That's why Resident Evil 7
I think
is
Slender
so
sucks.
good.
Yeah, Resident Evil 7 is
Because
fucking
Resident
awesome.
Evil 7 takes some of the stuff that PT was trying, and it takes a lot of the stuff from things like Amnesia and like Slender, but puts it all into a very RE1 framework. Like the puzzles and the inventory stuff is all very RE1.
Familiarizing yourself with where you are. Because here's the thing, like, I find, other than PT, which is its own crazy, obtuse thing, like, I think that's one of the best pieces of, like, horror fiction. But, like, I traditionally like horror games that still have combat as an option, like Alien Isolation and, like, most recently, like, the Blair Witch game and stuff like that, because they're less stealth games and more survival games. Like when things like Amnesia and Outlast got big, we lost and like Layers of Fear and stuff like that, we lost the ability to like respond to situations, and that's what I find scary.
That's the thing.
You
Yeah,
know,
it's not
like-
being able to just sneak past it with tension. Like,
Yeah.
To me,
Like, that
people
broke it
disagree
for
on me.
me.
But to me, Amnesia, because I played it, is like, it's not a scary game.
It's a stealth game.
You just like, at some point, I got frustrated with Amnesia. I just started walking around, and then when I got caught, I was like, all right, kill me and let me respawn and try it again.
Exactly. You eventually
stealth
you
game,
feel
yeah.
defeated, and you're just
Yeah.
like, all right, now I see the
I can't
mechanics
do
at
anything.
work, and and
yeah, whereas Resident Evil, there's no real sneaking around in that first game. It's just you have to go down this hallway. And you have to face
and then
whatever's
Yeah.
coming. You know?
Exactly. Yeah, you have to approach things head on.
I played the RE2 remake, and then a licker jumped out of the wall, and I was like, fuck.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
And juggling your supplies is a huge part of, I think, what makes things like Resident Evil and
That
Silent
thing
Hill
about, like,
scary.
I'm going to try not...
Counting your bullets and stuff.
Even from a shooting game perspective, like Resident Evil is just like in Halo, I'm just like, die! And just like holding the trigger
you'll
on the
drop
assault
a gun
rifle.
and pick up another one.
Yeah,
you're like-
just like whatever. Fine, I'll take a plasma pistol and just start killing stuff. And then in Resident Evil, you're like, well, if I don't get a headshot, then that's one less bullet I can use later.
Yeah.
Like,
How many times in Dead Space did you reload your gun before you realized you were just burning through your ammo?
oh, a lot.
Yeah, I did
A lot. To go back to earlier when you're talking about Ravenholm, there's a part in Gears 4
yeah.
that's pretty scary. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Remember that part?
Yeah, I do.
Where you go to like the haunted town, and then like you have to stay. There's like some of the lights in the town are on, and they're like little spotlights, and you have to run in between them because if not, the crows will
Yeah,
get you.
it relies on games to have to get creative. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's funny because, like, I think Soma is an incredible fucking game, and the monsters are the worst part. People literally modded the game to...
Yeah, that's how I played Soma.
I know, because the story's incredible, and the setting is
And it was
creepy,
still
and
scary.
it's still scary because
Yeah.
it's thematically terrifying. Like, what makes that game scary isn't like, I gotta memorize this AI's walking routine to get by them. That's
Yeah.
not fucking scary.
Yeah.
What's fucking scary are the implications of like what consciousness means and like losing your humanity and stuff like that's fucking scary. Like,
Yeah.
you know, so I don't like this trend, and it's also become like combat is hard to program. Like, it's cheaper to make a game where that has less mechanics. And I'm not trying to like pick on small studios for approaching the topic of horror, but it's sad that I think during the PS1 and PS2 generation, it was a much more represented genre than it is now. And that, and, you know, maybe because horror games became action games. Like,
That's because I think combat with zombies is actually very easy to do.
Yeah.
Because the AI for zombies is literally just like, get them. No matter what,
Yeah.
Just
run and
walk.
get them.
And I understand that like action horror titles eventually leaned too hard into action. You saw it later with Resi, but like I was a big fan of
That's 6, right? The one where it's just like basically just a battle.
it's an
the whole-
anime essentially, yeah. I liked Fear and Condemned a lot. I liked
I
those games a
remember
lot.
Fear.
Yeah. And those games eventually did the same thing. Like by the time you got to Fear 3 and Dead Space 3, they were just full-blown action games.
Yeah, Dead Space
You know,
3
like-
is just a big sci-fi action
Yeah,
game.
which is fine, but like I missed that atmosphere. I missed that tension, you know, like Condemned is a fucking creepy game. Like, you know, but once you start giving the player more and more, like it's a hard balance.
Yeah.
You have to give players a certain amount of freedom, but not too much. Like programming horror, it's never been more difficult to make people scared. And that goes for movies and stuff as well. Like, you know, it's So yeah, it did not take long at all for Resident Evil to be a bestseller in Japan, the UK, and North America.
No.
The first title, or that first release, I should say, alone was said to have sold around 2.75 million, not only making it the top-selling PlayStation title at the time, but also the third best-reviewed game of the year, only behind the historic Super Mario 64 and heavily anticipated sequel Tekken 2. It currently sits at a 91 on Metacritic, while also receiving many Game of the Year acknowledgments, mostly all runner-ups because of Mario. I totally get it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's a rough year to put out a game.
Yeah.
It's like the most revolutionary, amazing 3D platformer of all
Listen,
time.
I love Resident Evil, but Mario fucking 64. But outlets still applauded the gripping pace, its creepy atmosphere, the mixture of combat and puzzles, the realism of its graphics and sound for the time, the option of a character selection, even its high replayability. Honestly, the only major criticisms, looking past at these older reviews, were mostly due to its terrible fucking dialogue and voice acting. You think people would have been more divisive over the tank control scheme as well, but for the era, it made sense. But anyway, Capcom couldn't just sit back and let all that success just lie there and go to waste. We had to remake the game 8 dozen times. The people were bloodthirsty for Resident Evil, especially those that were lame and didn't have a PlayStation, like me. So, let's get ports in. Windows was first, only hitting a year later. Seemed easy enough. They even added support for 3D accelerator cards as well, allowing for much sharper graphics than its console counterpart.
Remember those?
Yeah.
3D accelerator cards. Remember those?
Plus, this version actually featured the uncensored footage from the Japanese version as well, with the intro being in full color rather than
with
the black and white.
cigarettes in it?
The cigarette is in it.
Whoa.
I guess there just wasn't really as much pressure on PC titles back then when you consider the size of the audience. Mortal Kombat and Night Trap weren't on computer or PC after all, so, you know. But yeah, they also added some new unlockable weapons and alternate costumes, as well as the inclusion of optionally skipping door animations. Interestingly,
Yeah, we can do it faster on the computer, so...
I didn't know this, by the way. This version was also developed by Westwood Studios, famous for their work on the Command & Conquer series, which I also loved.
Also big fans of FMV.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
Oh my god, there's so many actors, like James Earl Jones and like Tim Curry are in there.
What's his name? The fucking...
I think J.K. Simmons is in one.
Not J.K. Simmons. It's another
George Takei.
white bald guy.
Oh, there are a lot of white bald guys.
Michael Ironside?
This port.
Yes,
oh yeah,
I
it was
think so.
Michael Ironside. Yeah.
Voice of
Sam Fisher. Yeah. In publishing that port in North America and Europe. So what about PlayStation's direct competitors, though? Well, at TGS 97, Capcom would officially reveal a version of Resident Evil for the Sega Saturn. Remember from Chris's episode, the Saturn was still kind of big in Japan as opposed to here.
Yeah, very big.
Yeah. However, according to Akio Sakai, the company's head of consumer software division, Capcom was initially sort of hesitant to port RE to the platform as the hardware wasn't not as ideally suited to the title as the PlayStation's was. This meant the port was going to take some time. Also, much of this unveiling was mostly overshadowed by the fact that Capcom was already showing a demo for the unnamed sequel on the PlayStation at this same event.
Jeez.
Unnamed?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, they took some
they
time
really
to come up with Resident Evil 2.
But that Saturn version did eventually still come out and had its own platform-exclusive features as well. Although, speaking of RE2 and its high fan anticipation as well as fan frustration over its very publicized delay, our guys on the Resi team cracked an idea to hold folks over. Launch a director's cut off the best-selling first game and package it with a pre-release demo for 2. This time, with all the blood and guts intact, it'd be a perfect way to keep the train
and
running.
this time, a whole pack of cigarettes.
It's
just one.
A big fat cigar. Well, this version would release only a year and a half after the original in September of 97. Sorry, I think I might have forgotten that before, but that first release was just in March of 1996. So yeah, this was a pretty quick turnaround, and fairly uncommon in the industry to do something like this, although I gotta say, it definitely proved successful, with this edition achieving almost as much in sales again as the first, likely due to its uncensored label.
Oh, probably, yeah.
The only problem was, it wasn't uncensored at all. Despite the title being marketed as featuring the original unedited footage from the Japanese release, the FMV sequences were still fucking cut up. Capcom claimed the omission was a result of a localization mistake made by the developers, so their solution was to just offer the real intro as a free download from their website. They even had to change the box art right before it hit the shelves so it would accurately matched the description.
Jeez.
I had a friend who fell for this back in the day. That's why I had to put it in there.
That's funny.
Yeah, regardless, this version was still well enjoyed. They brought back the auto-aim feature that was initially removed, added a beginner mode, along with a new rearranged build to the campaign for those that were already so familiar with it. Kind of cool. But let's fast forward another year to when RE2 is now out and bringing Resident Evil fever back into the mainstream again. And what do you say we try another issue of 1, though? This time for all those sequel fans who were enjoying the PlayStation's new controller. Naturally, this last release of
the DualShock
1 on the
version.
system would be called Resident Evil Director's Cut DualShock Edition, utilizing all the paddles, new feature like Rumble, and its now famous twin sticks. This third version was still edited, of course, but it did now...
Another localization
Yeah,
mistake,
whoops.
sorry.
But it did now at least host an entire new soundtrack hosted by composer Mamoru Samuragochi, a man who falsely claimed to be deaf for most of his career, including when including when this was recorded. I believed before he was exposed, the media was dubbing him as the digital Beethoven.
Oh, God.
There was a documentary made about this man to celebrate him, and then he apparently botched a bunch of performances and interviews where they had people speaking sign.
So you're deaf, right? What? Damn it.
Yeah, no, it's so close. At one point they were at his house, and he responded to the doorbell ringing, and that was like the...
That's great.
It's like they exposed him in the middle of the documentary or something?
No, they finished the documentary, but there was like a later interview where they were at his place, and then like the doorbell rang, and he like responded to it, and the people were we're like, wait, what? What? Did you feel that? Like what?
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah.
What an idiot.
Yeah. But anyway, that's 3 games of the same game in 3 years, which is kind of nuts, or at least it was until the past couple of years, I guess. Now we do that all the time.
That's the last time that they ever release that game again, right?
Yeah, you wish. So we got our PC and a couple of home console versions now out, except what if you wanted to play Resi on the go? Well, in 1998, Capcom would actually begin work with company HotGen on a Game Boy Color release, set to be out in late 99 or early 2000-ish. It was supposed to be anyway, but then the higher-ups decided to unfortunately cancel the project, citing that the port was of a poor quality due to the system's limited hardware.
No how the fuck were you that supposed? They're still like 10 years off of that like tech being available. Why were they trying that?
But here's the thing, though. I watched videos of that like being played. Holy shit! Like this probably would have been the most ambitious release ever for that handheld. It's goddamn nuts. Most Game Boy counterparts of popular console games are usually just like the most watered down or stripped thing ever, to the point of just being a completely separate thing. This version was going to contain every single room, weapon, cutscene, subtitle, and just about all the items and notes that were present in the original PlayStation game.
I thought, what if it was just Sweet Home ported?
That would have fit it way better. But honestly, like, it was probably all just too much work for them to go through with completing it. But it's interesting to see what could have been there. As somebody who didn't own their own PlayStation at the time, but did have a Game Boy Color, I would have killed for this to come.
Yeah.
This is like the actual game.
Yeah.
I'm watching it right now.
It's
like,
fucking wild.
look at this. This is insane. It's
That's on a goddamn Game Boy Color. It's like even the frames of animation on your character, you're moving in front of the backgrounds, the color back. Like
I guess technically all you'd have to do really is do that. Just tone it down a whole bunch.
I know, but that's the thing. I got to the point where they're like, this game's way too long, like, to do this shit. But it was fucking kind of cool.
That is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I bet you somebody could do it now in like a couple of days or a week
like,
or something.
I would have fucking lost it if that happened. Because I had to go over to my friend's house and, like, play in his dark basement by ourselves in the middle of it. Like, I would have loved to have my own, like, version that I could play by myself.
Yeah.
Even though playing it together was probably, him exposing me to this was the only way I would have ever been into it, because I was a scared little kid and he had access to stuff I didn't have access to.
Oh, I'll watch horror games all day long.
Yeah. But alright, so years go by, the versions that did hit the shelves are continuing to sell like hotcakes. We're probably at around 6 million copies
Time out.
or
Have
so.
you ever bought a hot cake in your entire life?
What is
I
a
bought
hotcake?
one not even a week ago.
What? Where?
It's a pancake, dude.
Oh, you talking about like McDonald's calls their pancakes hotcakes?
Yeah, it's exactly what I'm talking about.
Fuck
The
that.
other day, I was at your house and I was very hungry.
So like they sell like, all right, Like
And
that's
there
what's all like hotcakes.
And I left at 3 in the morning, and the
Somebody
only place
owned
that was
pancakes?
open was McDonald's.
At 3 in the morning.
Yeah, they're open 24/7 by my
And
house.
they have a limited menu, but it's
Oh yeah,
just
that
it's
one-
all the breakfast
that
shit
one
and then like
in
quarter
the,
pounders.
I used to work near there at that shop right overnight, and kids would order like 100-piece nuggets at 2:30 in the morning.
We did that when they had the 50-piece nugget box.
Yeah.
We were hanging at a friend of ours' place, and we went there and we ordered like 3 of them, and you just hear in the back of the kitchen like, fuck! It's the worst promotion for those poor employees. But we're 6 million copies at this point in our timeline. The series also went on to find even more success with entries like 2, 3 Nemesis, and Code Veronica. I think Code Veronica was Dreamcast. They released it as Code Veronica X, I think later for
the
GameCube and
yeah.
PS2.
I remember
like
seeing
the
that on the
GameCube.
shelves at Blockbuster.
Yeah, but speaking of GameCube, in 2002,
like GameCube.
something fucking awesome happened. The top-to-bottom RE make for the Nintendo GameCube was released.
Is that just for GameCube?
That purple lunchbox. It was exclusive to the GameCube for over 10 years. That's
right.
why. Yeah.
Okay. So it wasn't on the good consoles then.
It wasn't on the bad consoles, no. As part of this was a part of an exclusivity agreement between Capcom and the Big N that would span 3 new games. Not to be confused with the Capcom 5. If anybody
How
remembers
much money
that
would you pay
initiative.
for a GameCube that played tapes?
More than
Now
you
you're
think.
just picking on.
Did any of you guys recall the Capcom 5? I was excited about
Is
it at
that
the time.
Beautiful Joe, Okami,
No, it was not Okami, but it was Beautiful Joe. It's one.
Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg?
No,
that was Sega.
It was.
What is this, like a compilation?
It was like
It was like a deal of exclusives made by Capcom for the GameCube.
Oh, okay.
So they had Beautiful Joe, which later I think came to the PS2. They had Killer 7, which
Killer
Yeah,
7.
we've
also
talked
came to
about
the PS2.
Killer 7
I love
a
Killer
bunch.
7. They had Resident Evil 4, which eventually also did come out on other stuff. That was the big one. And then they also had a game called Dead Phoenix that was canceled. It was like a Sin and Punishment style game. And then they had Did anybody ever play Piano 3? It was a sci-fi.
Piano 3?
Piano 3.
Yeah.
It was a sci-fi action fighting dance game.
I get that game
That
confused.
stayed exclusive to the GameCube.
I
That
get-
was there.
I don't know why, but I get that game confused in my head a lot with Parasite Eve.
There's a lot of
I
Japanese
think it's just
imagery.
because they're both anime as fuck and they begin with the letter P.
They are. Parasite Eve was about people that were spontaneously combusting.
Yeah, it
And
was.
an RPG at an opera
Yeah.
house
Wild.
or something.
And then-
Yeah, that game's crazy.
Which one's the third birthday? That's Parasite Eve 3, right?
Yeah, they made a sequel, but it was only for PSP or
Yeah.
Vita or something. Yeah, I never got to play.
Wait, what were the Capcom 3 then?
I think those were like they directly ported Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 and Code Veronica
Oh, okay.
to GameCube, I think. So the Capcom 8. Anyway, yeah, remake. For whatever reason, this publisher seemed to be the only company super dedicated into re-exploring older titles this way. I guess now, technically, you have the Final Fantasy VII remake going on
Yeah,
right now.
This is Square also.
Whenever the hell that thing's actually going to come out, like, or
March.
Yeah, next
Right.
year.
March 2020.
well, I mean, whatever it's going to be anyway. Do we know that it's even the full game yet?
It's reviewed well, and no, it's not
It's
the
not
full
the
game.
full game, but the box does say Final Fantasy VII Remake, no part 1 or anything.
That's what I'm
so-
saying.
Yeah, but it's only up to, I believe, the end of the
I think I
first
s-
disc
yeah,
or
that's
around
the thing,
that,
like,
that
It's,
area.
it's the end of Midgard.
I said this.
Okay, yeah, so
that's
not
the
even-
first fucking area.
Not even the first
Not even
disc,
the
yeah.
first
What the
disc,
fuck?
yeah.
Like, I think I said this in our E3 episode. Was like, what if you never played? Because I know a lot of people that played the RE remake, and never played the original.
Yeah.
What if you never played Final Fantasy VII all the way through on the PlayStation?
They're going to add more
And then you go to-
sexism to extend the time.
No cross-dressing. But it's like, what if you bought this game and it just fucking cuts off, and you're like, what? Like, where on the box does it say? Like, whatever. But
It's going to be like a 40-hour game, dude.
yeah.
You know all those times when you go between pre-rendered backgrounds, they're going to add like an hour of gameplay in between each screen.
Where you just walk through those rendered backgrounds, fully rendered.
But this project was nuts because they pretty much built a whole new game from the ground up, except it would be faithful in gameplay and tell the same story. They, of course, redid all the visuals and sound to take advantage of the new hardware. They added tons of new elements and environments, including areas beyond the mansion that had to be cut from the original game.
Yeah, it was like when they did Link's Awakening DX and they added the color dungeon.
Color Dungeon?
It was like that.
I hear that's in the new release as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I'm not paying $60 for a Game Boy game from before the year 2000.
But what if it had frame rate drops?
Them in listening. Like, talk about double buffered VSync.
But But there were also extra modes and difficulties in here as well. The puzzles were even completely modified so that veteran players wouldn't already know all the answers to everything. For better or for worse, all the old voice acting was gone to make way for the newer and less cheesy, but still kind of cheesy, performances. The result was seriously lightning striking twice, doing the impossible, not only remaking a classic, but doing such a good job that your new vision becomes just as celebrated as the old one. They even shared the exact same Metacritic score. It's great. Now, I personally love this reimagining, probably even more than the original. It's gorgeous, genuinely scary, just so much more realized, too. I don't even care if it was just meant for the team to get familiarized with the console so that Zero could come out that same year.
That remake is good.
Yeah. I know we played through it, was it last year or the year before?
Yeah.
So you could say it?
The gameplay's a little antiquated.
Yeah.
But it's an antiquated console, so...
Yeah.
No, well, we played through it when the remake got remastered.
You have to make your controls half-baked when your console has a handle on it.
Fuck you!
Wait, is that a reference to that you'd have to bake the console?
I don't know.
Every console should have a handle on it.
No.
But this was a masterpiece of its time. But honestly, this was probably tied with my favorite remake ever, with maybe Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes and the series' own Resident Evil 2 just this year, to be tied with it.
That RE2 remake is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Everybody listening, go play it if you haven't. Make it your spooky game.
Me and us talked about this before, though, how there are straight-up ports, HD remasters, and then, full-scale things like this. I really wish more games from that era would get this kind of treatment.
And then sometimes they port the PC version of RE4 to the Xbox One, and it doesn't have subtitles.
Yeah. Sometimes they port the PC version of Jedi Outcast for the Switch and forget to put auto-aim on a console that has the worst joysticks ever.
Jeez.
Shut up and play Tetris 99.
All right. Hey, you can't even play Jedi Outcast on Switch. You can't invert the look because it's a port of the PC version where you can't do that.
I mean, you should be able to invert the look on a mouse even, but whatever. Bad game.
You keep on flying planes.
That is rough.
That is not a bad game. That game rules in 2002.
Sure.
But anyway, the RE make would shatter critical and fan expectations, but not so much the commercial goals, which is why they would just reissue that 1-2 in the spirit of the first game, right? Yeah. They ported to the Wii in 2008 if you wanted to control the game like an idiot, and then again, except this time, to more competent high-definition platforms in 2015 for the PS3,
like the Wii U.
PS4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, PC, not Wii U, and they even updated the controversial tank controls, allowing the user to switch between that and a more modern playstyle. That's the one we played.
Yeah.
I think tank controls are fine. They don't bug me.
No, it didn't really bug me either.
Now, when I was playing that, we were playing it with a group of people and passing the controller back and forth. I really wanted to switch to... I think the tank controls probably work better for that than the fixed
modern
camera.
one,
The modern ones, yeah.
Doesn't Until Dawn kind of have...
tank controls? Yeah.
Yeah, so that worked. That's modern. But what do you say we still talk about one more version of Resident Evil?
Is this the Carnival game version?
We still didn't have the game on the go yet. It's bullshit. That's why
I thought you skipped this one.
That's
I was about
why
to bring it up.
In 2006, for the landmark title's 10th official anniversary, a handheld port would be developed for the Nintendo DS, it being called Deadly Silence. You get it? Deadly Silence, DS.
It's fucking stupid.
They did it with a bunch of games back then, like Advance Wars Dual Strike and Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow. You saw that a lot.
There was a Full Metal Alchemist game I bought for DS that had DS Dual Sympathies.
That's
something
stupid.
like that. And then you also have like Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance.
That's 3Ds because it's on 3DS.
Mm-hmm.
Chris just falls out of his chair.
Just explode.
But yeah, this version would commemorate the PlayStation game with a classic version, while a new Rebirth mode would take advantage of the DS's specific features like touchscreen sequences and even moments where you would have to blow into the system's microphone. Those are whatever, but Resident Evil is still not yet uncensored. They fucking did the same thing with the intro again.
That was the first version I played.
That had the black and white opener on a tiny
Silence.
screen.
I borrowed Deadly Silence from somebody, or like I was at their house and they let me play it, and then I went to buy it, but it was like, I think this was like 2008, so the game was out of print.
Yeah, that's why it was hard to find.
DS games that go out of print end up costing triple.
Hey,
So it was like a $50 game at that point.
Side
so.
note, you remember when they made Resident Evil Revelations on 3DS and they spelled the game wrong on the box?
Yeah, I have that box.
Yeah, the misprint one, Revelations.
Revelations.
Yeah, that's great.
I have that one.
But there it was. Resident Evil was finally there, available for those not wanting to use a TV. It was,
When are they going to put it on my phone?
I don't know. It's a good question. But yeah, I played through that whole game. It was fun. Controlled fine. Each mode made use of the dual screens by showing your map, which was very nice. They even added a co-op thing that could have been better, but you know. But that's more or less the story of the world's venture into the universe of Resident Evil. Obviously, there are loads of entries that I could personally talk about forever. The GameCube remake could be its own episode for me. Of course, after the series' initial run as adventure games, it would see another resurgence as more modern action titles, starting with the release of 4, all the way through 6, and the 2 Revelations games. I almost said Revelations. Many still call 4 the best of the franchise, and even one of the top games of all time.
Many would be wrong.
While I do love 4, and even the bombastic dumbness of 6, I will always be married to the idea of mixing true horror with puzzle solving. That being said, Resident Evil throughout the decades would see all kinds of responses with its releases, both positive and negative. There were light gun games, multiplayer offshoots, even a non-canon side story. But the saga still needed a much-needed nap. This decision would later prove to be the best possible outcome for the series when it returned again this current generation with the fucking most dopest entries yet. In 2017, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, or as we said earlier, Biohazard 7 Resident Evil, would finally go back to its roots.
Biohazard 7 Biohazard.
Resident Evil 7 Resident Evil. This would prioritize frightening scares and gruesome imagery, immersive storytelling, interesting puzzle solving, environmental familiarity, old school item management, and just intense overall survival. All while in the first-person perspective that the team had always dreamed of. It even offered the option of playing its full terrifying campaign in virtual reality for the PlayStation VR, adding a whole new level of dimension for those brave enough to seek it.
Fuck that, dude.
I love it.
Have you done? Yeah, I wanted to come over and just try it a little bit.
You should.
But I'm
There's
still
a
fucking
demo.
scared.
There's a part in the game I remember, like, if I didn't have people around me, I would have called it quits because the game also has binaural audio, so you can hear things all around the house. And there's a part in the game when you're there's a basement, and the basement is blocked off by a like a metal grate door.
Yeah.
And if you're playing it not in VR, it's just a wall, like, essentially. It's, you know, you can't get past it. But if you're playing it in VR, you can stick your head through the bars and then lean and look down into the dark basement, and you hear, like, something, like, moaning in the basement there. And I was just like, fuck. And you feel like people are coming up behind you while you're peeking your head through these bars. It's fucking...
It's freaky.
Holy shit. But like I said earlier, it's sold well enough at over 6 million copies and went on to be nominated for several Game of the Year awards for everything from direction to sound to technical
Do we know
recognitions.
if anybody from the classic had anything to do with it? Like any sort of
There
dream,
were some
dream
people,
come
yeah, that
trues?
stayed over. Yeah, I'll get into their staff. But this
Shinji Mikami left to
Yes.
form Tango
Tango
and made
Works.
Evil Within.
1 and 2.
Yeah.
And another thing that I will get into as well. But no, this was like... At least people were really into high production of it, the brand new engine, and its VR inclusion. Like, that was very much celebrated in those spaces to, like, acknowledge the top games of that year, which was really rad.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know this episode is more about RE1, but 7 just made it feel like the way I felt playing 1 as a kid again.
Kind of full
you know?
circle,
Like,
yeah. It makes sense.
It just felt so pure to me. I can see why so many people compare it to that first game in so many ways, like Austin said.
Yeah.
Now, riding high from that release and not wanting that magnificent RE engine to go to waste, Capcom fired another hit out just 2 years later with another full remake, as we brought up earlier, this time of the beloved Resident Evil 2, which was also on the PlayStation, this one back in 1998. I won't spend too long on this one, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least bring it up, as it still is currently the most highest rated title of this year. And it's really killer. Everybody should play it, whether you experience the original release or not. It is a little safe. They ditched the first-person format to have 2 play more like 4, but it feels fucking great. It looks fantastic. The puzzles and scares are all there too. It's super fun. But with the series being back in people's good graces again, I enjoyed 6, but, you know, come at me. As well as the sales charts.
I will. Later.
It's nice to see this groundbreaking 1996 release continue to be honored in a new renaissance. However, before we go, let's just one last time look back at that first game to see where it now lies in a 2019 reflection. For those looking to play it, and not the remake for whatever reason, it doesn't appear to be too difficult or expensive to find or emulate. A version of the Director's Cut does appear on the PlayStation Classic Micro
those
Console.
are like $5 now.
Yeah, for those seeking that. Yeah, they're really fire selling that fucking thing. Meanwhile, many outlets and sources still continue to this day to celebrate its legacy. Next Generation, Game Informer, Time Magazine, and G4 all placed it on their lists of the greatest video games ever made, while also going on to call some of its scares some of the most memorable moments in the medium. They even credit it once again for coining the survival horror term used to describe titles of the nature. Retro Gamer also voted it in their top games as well, adding that the shock, surprises, and perfectly poor B-movie dialogue makes Resident Evil the gaming equivalent of a Night of the Living Dead. Very high praise for the man who wanted to take a whack at the Romero setting himself to begin with.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of, where is our crew at these days? Well, most of the members would later go on to become a part of Capcom Production Studio 4, while Austin said director Shinji Mikami, he went on to create loads of other awesome works before starting his own company. He worked on Devil May Cry, Phoenix Wright, Steel Battalion, Killer 7, God Hand, Vanquish, and then in 2010, that's when he wanted to open his own, Tango Gameworks.
Tango Gameworks.
Yeah, he wanted to launch his own studio. They went on to make the 2 Evil Within games, which are alright, but they are also currently working on that Ghostwire Tokyo game, which looks real cool.
Which looks cool, yeah.
Like,
I remember seeing that.
I'm interested in seeing more of that a lot. Producer Fujiwara, unfortunately, has fallen off the map a little bit, with his last known works being Bionic Commando Rearmed and that Mad World game for Wii. Apparently, he did have to take a break from the industry due to health reasons, but I do believe he is feeling better and coming back to it again, which is cool. As far as I know, most of the other big names are still sticking to the series strong, but I do believe that is our story for today. Thank you guys so much for letting me get that all out. I know tons of it probably came off as me fanboying out a bit, which is funny because there are plenty of bad Resident Evil games out there too. Even the ones that I talked about today that I still love have problems. None of them are perfect. They're not Tetris.
Wow. Okay.
I like Eternal Darkness probably even more than both versions of 1. I like Dead Space more than 4. I think RE7 and PT are kind of neck and neck to me. Not that they are directly comparable, but... And for those super into horror culture who I think can definitely relate to this, you really just never ever forget the feeling of the first time you were excited to be scared. It's fun and you never want to stop chasing it. It doesn't matter if it was by reading an old Goosebumps book or watching an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nick back in the day, or just seeing some slasher flick on TV when you were likely far too young to be. Resident Evil for the
Nightmare on Elm
PlayStation,
Street.
yeah?
That's me.
Resident Evil on PlayStation was my initial push into wanting to go after the pursuit of what makes us afraid. I never stopped there. I love horror. I think most horror movies are bad. Most horror games are bad. But the ones that are good, they really stick with you. That's what I seek out. Like, to me, it's worth digging through to find the ones that connect with me and the people around me. I'll always have a spot in my heart for it. But happy Halloween!
Tell everybody your heart.
Yeah, that's where we had our screamer right there at the end.
Well said, Randall.
Thanks.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me be a dork.
Yeah.
I can't wait till I get to my Tetris episode when I get to talk about.
Tetris was graded by Joseph Stalin as a torture device for captured Americans during the Cold War.
I've been doing research. That is not true.
Prove me wrong.
I think I'll ever get my Tetris horror game.
It's called Tetris.
There's a Halloween theme for $99. You got it.
I do have it already.
There's this gut-wrenching scream every time you knock someone out.
I know, it's great, yeah! That's what I want a battle royale game to be. Play us out on the Moonlight
This
Sonata.
was Halloween. If you guys like this sort of monthly theme thing, we're only going to do it once a year, so, get over it.
Are there any Thanksgiving games?
Yeah, nothing worth making a whole theme out of it.
No!
No.
What about Christmas games?
There's a couple of those.
Are there? Are any of them good?
No, probably
No.
not.
Elf Bowling, remember that?
God.
It's like the lowest rated game on IGN.
Yeah, it was like that Flash game, but on fucking DS or
Yeah.
something. The one you could play for free.
Yeah. So yeah, it was fun to do this. Do
Yeah,
a whole month
thank you.
of horror or spooky related in some slight way or the other video game. So that was cool.
Yeah,
And
there's
we'll get
nothing
back,
spookier than football.
and we'll get back to our regular scheduled,
You ever
mostly
seen John Madden?
yeah, our regularly scheduled, mostly still unnerving and spooky weird stories that are indistinguishable.
We just had
as
to
the year
like,
continues.
we just had to decide on these. There were other
Yeah.
spooky, scary
Yeah,
stories
we're
we didn't
going
get
back
to.
from ghosts and zombies to capitalism.
I can't wait
Yeah, this was a nice break from.
from real fear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I explicitly said simulated fear, except for that guy who was hunted down by the Yakuza. That's
We do
pretty
some
scary.
plugs. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
If this is your first episode, you can go to hotbuttoncast.com, find a bunch more you can listen to the 3 previous weeks, which were all Hotween related episodes.
We need Hotween shirts.
Yeah. You can listen to all the rest of our episodes. We mentioned a couple. We did a PlayStation episode. There's a Dreamcast episode. There's an episode on the ESRB. There's a whole bunch of
A
them.
lot of those got referenced today.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff. Check it all out.
Yeah, check it out. You can also follow
Any
us
big hot
on-
coffee fans out there?
If you go to our website, you can find where to subscribe to us. We have links to our iTunes and our Spotify and our Google Play. We're also on any other podcast service that you
Wherever
use.
podcasts are found.
Exactly.
Open your window and shout into the wind.
And also, you can find us on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook at HotButtonCast.
Across all the social medias.
yeah, we'll
and there's
keep-
probably more, but
We'll
who
keep
cares?
you up to date there on all our latest episodes, and you can message us on there and tell us how scared you were. I don't know.
I'm so hungry I could eat a Jill sandwich.
Yeah. And with that, we're out.
Okay.
Master of
Watch out
Unlocking or
behind you.
whatever.
Oh yeah, at the screaming now, Jason.